Good morning, Grant. We've got all of our guests joining us for today's morning consult AI Spotlight. We'll give everyone kind of about 30 seconds here as Zoom lets everyone in. Where are you coming to us from today, Grant?
I am in, well, not quite yet sunny San Francisco, but I'm hopeful that what we will end up with will be a lovely day in San Francisco.
I'm coming from Chicago, so it's the aspiration of spring that we see. We see some shoots of leaves or buds on trees. As we let everyone kind of come in here, just want to make sure everyone knows like the goal here of the Morning Consult AI Spotlight is to sort of almost in some ways be like the anti-panel. Like not that panels aren't great or conferences aren't great, but just I think when we're talking about AI, one of the things that I find challenging is it's one thing to hear folks talk about it on a stool or to see slides. It's totally different to actually talk about sort of the nuts and bolts practitioner leadership perspective of it. And so the goal of these kind of webinars is to have that fly in the wall type piece. Like if Grant and I were having this conversation without, 250, 300 of our closest friends watching, this would be the same conversation that we would have. And so I'm really excited to welcome everyone here for the Morning Consult AI Spotlight with Grant Toops, the CEO of Hotwire. I've known Grant now probably more years than both of us want to acknowledge. But what's really exciting is that Grant has this great perspective, having been the managing partner at ICF Next and Chief Technology Officer at Hilton Knowlton, and then obviously taking on leadership role in the Burson merger with a global Chief Digital Officer, Intelligence Officer role. And now you're 4 months into the CEO role at Hotwire. So you kind of have this great perspective across so many agencies, across so many clients that I feel like we sort of just jump into it and let's go.
Yeah, I think when we met, you're one of the few people in the industry when we met, I still had hair. So yeah, that's how long ago.
I'm gonna join you fast there. But I think one of the exciting things to me is like just starting off with kind of a baseline set of like, okay, Chat GPT 3.0, the base model launches in June of 22. Most folks start to encounter it in November of 22. Um, that seems like yesterday. It seems like forever ago. Like, talk about, I guess, from your perspective across those roles and across that kind of 3, 4 year time horizon. Like, did it play out the way you thought it would? What were the inflection moments for you personally? What were sort of the professional inflection moments?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think in some ways it played out exactly how I expected to, and in some ways I was fundamentally wrong at many, many turns, right? Which I guess is the world we live in. But first, I think for a lot of us when we first started to interact with it, right? These sorts of capabilities had been in use and existence kind of before broad consumer availability of LLMs. So we were using it on the data science side for quite a long time, different types of AI, right? Generative was really the thing that broke through, to your point, that made this something that like the average lay person, no matter their profession or their skill set, kind of was aware of and knew about. And I think, when that happened, there was this rush or race to excitement for the possibility of transformation. And, the I think over the course of then the subsequent number of years, what we saw was that both happen exactly the way we thought it would, right? We're seeing technology change so quickly. We're seeing the capacity of what these tools can do. We're seeing the evolution of what they enable our people to do. Like, no matter what your job is, no matter what it is you're trying to accomplish, we saw all of that. But at the same time, I think we saw something that is uniquely human and repeated throughout history, which is a macro resistance to change. That people don't like to do things differently. That they earn the confidence and stability is important to sort of the human psyche, and so that's not how we do that. Became a really really big and quite important, I think, institutional resistance to what was possible in AI. And at the same time, so you have these two competing sort of I guess feelings going on. And what that meant as I was, moving through a couple of really large organizations and then into kind of a mid-sized organization at Hotwire, is you saw that play out in a lot of different flavors in a lot of different ways. But the fundamental truth was those organizations that could figure out not just how to do the tech right, but how to inspire, motivate, paint a picture for their employees, for their customers, for their clients, for their regulators, for sort of all the key stakeholders of the potential good, the potential benefit, and the role that people could play in making that good true, real. I think those organizations saw benefit. They got out in front of it. I'm really, really proud of some of the stuff that we built early on at Hill and Knowlton and then at Burson because we really embraced that idea. And honestly, that's part of what brought me to Hotwire because Hotwire had been out in front on a number of these things, right? Building proprietary tech at a time when PR agencies weren't building tech. That was sort of not a thing that was out there in the world. And I think that maybe represents the final stage of this shift, which is or maybe the next stage. I shouldn't say final. We don't know
Well,
what's going
and maybe I guess before we kind of jump into some of those direct applications, like, was there a moment where you're like, I'm sitting in this desk in this setting, and like something happened? Like for me, like I think there was like two moments that stand out. Like one was we had started to work with this retrieval augmented generation architecture, basically trying to address the hallucination issue. And because we have those hundreds of millions of interviews, like we don't want it hallucinating. We wanted to report the data as it is. And I remember like the first time just getting it to generate a bar chart. Like it was like an ugly horizontal bar chart. I don't even think we could do vertical bar charts at that point. Like it was a horizontal bar chart. But then it wrote like a text summary of what was in the bar chart. And that was like a like oh shit moment. I guess we're not like regulated by the FCC here, so I can speak candidly. The second then was actually, I think in October. I feel like that last round of like model iteration evolution was this ability to write essentially advanced comparative economic analysis across countries. I thought I was going to be a PhD in economics. I guess I'm a little bit relieved that I didn't do a PhD in economics from a comparative standpoint. But like those were at least two moments for me. Where it was like just the bar chart and a text summary was like, oh wow, this is coming. And then I feel like the last model iteration was like, this is here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there are probably dozens of moments, but the one that jumps out at me when you ask the question is I was vetting potential partners for a solution that we were trying to build that would basically look at I'm going to call it like the near dark web. So not quite the actual dark web, but like the gray web, the unmoderated edges of the internet, wherein conspiracy theories and misinformation and disinformation really started. And what we were testing was the theory that if you could use AI to gather and analyze that content, you could get an early warning system for risks and mis and disinformation attacks that might sort of become a problem for a brand. And there had long been a challenge of like, how do you get that information? And then once you have it, how do you actually analyze it without asking human beings to read things that were fundamentally detrimental to their mental health and so on, right? Because there's some dark stuff out there. And I remember very vividly being in demo of a tool, piece of technology that a good friend of mine, who's become a good friend, called Pendulum Intelligence built, and they were demoing basically the capacity to do this, and on demand was able to take a brand I cared about and show me a profile of the risks that were coming kind of from this gray web, dark web space. And in real time, I gave him the brand and saw this. And it was in that moment, and I was reading this analysis, and it was 75% as good as a human would have probably written it, maybe 70% at the time. And I thought, okay, this is it. Like this is because if we're already at
Yeah, it's an
70%, and
inflection.
this is
Like
the
you know, it's
first
changed. It's
time,
like it'll
yeah,
always be better than that moment. Like
yeah,
the
this is
sort of
the first time
progression
I've
of
ever seen
yeah,
it, and we're at 70%. Like this is
yeah.
gonna be, yeah. And I think we've then seen that happen in space after space in, area over and over and over again.
Yeah, and we're talking like the precipice of a Mythos model right now that isn't even publicly available. Okay, so that's a little bit of like recent past.
Mhm.
Today's, Is April 9th, 2026. So this will be sort of the demarcation. We're talking about the present. You joined Hotwire 4 months ago. You talked just a little bit before about like what attracted you to the role. What does AI look like today at Hotwire?
Yeah. I mean, I think, let me think about it. Let me talk about it maybe in two dimensions. Because I think, Hotwire, we are a public relations and marketing services agency. Like, we provide services to clients. And so, first and foremost, like where our clients are probably matters as much as anything else, maybe more. And so maybe I'll start there. And broadly speaking, right, as we think
Totally.
about buyers in comms, CCOs, CMOs across comms and marketing, what I'm seeing generally, I think the first is we really are kind of past the hype, but we haven't arrived yet, if that makes sense. Like we
Yeah.
haven't gotten, I think, to the end state. I think adoption is widespread. I think you see experimentation in a lot of places, but I'm not so sure the value translation is quite where it needs to be, right? A lot of CCOs and CMOs had their CEO go to a conference board meeting and come back and say, we should be able to cut every budget by 30%, and we should see EBITDA go up by however many points. And I think we are still not really there. And in part, it's because efficiency is really becoming table stakes. I think the real question is, what does AI do to the quality of decision making that we can make, to the quality of the sort of ultimate result that we can drive? And so we're really focused on, if you think about the kind of core fundamental workflow of communication in general. And I don't mean like corporate communications or PR. I mean like the human communication, right? There is a signal, there is an insight, and there is an action. You interpret something, you think about something, and you say something back, right? And I think for us, the core principle is that AI lets us compress the distance between those three things, which means for an enterprise, we can find the signal that matters much more quickly. We can derive an insight that's useful much more quickly, and then we can create an action. And that action is sometimes, written narrative. It's sometimes audio video. It's sometimes social content. It could be events, right? The form it takes is evolving as it always will. But I think like at its core, that compression, how do we make the journey from signal to insight to action shorter, is really what is driving us. Because at the end of the day, delivering efficiency is valuable from a business perspective, but you don't cut your way into growth, right? I
Right.
think that it's like management philosophy
Right.
is really important to us, and sort of at Hotwire, that's kind of how we're thinking about it. And so, that shift from saying we can't really be intuition led or exclusively intuition led, we have to be more evidence led. We have to shift to talking about, ROI isn't about hours saved or cost savings. It's about real business results, right? It's how do we make these lines go up and to the right, so to speak. And I think what that really means on the ground is probably a few things. And because obviously we're here Morning Consult, I'm going to sort of focus on the data intelligence side of things, because we could talk about all day the
Yeah, and I mean, I
bottom,
think ultimately
right?
it's like everyone's trying to think about how AI is impacting their own personal workflows and professional.
Yeah, which so I mean, I think we're looking at a few things that are really interesting. I think when we think about AI answer engines as search engine, right? The sort of concept of zero click, whether that's zero click commerce or zero click discovery or zero click awareness. I think, we increasingly are being driven by this idea that being present is enough. It is not enough. Like you can't just be visible. You have to be selected. Visibility becomes a vanity metric, and ultimately influence becomes the measure that matters, because what you're trying to do is convince the machine to convince the human who you won't interact with, right? And so when we think about that, those two ideas, that people get information differently and that we can use the tech to compress the time between getting a signal, having an insight, delivering an action, that's really what is driving what we are doing every day. It drives our roadmap. So we have a function within Hotwire called AI Labs. This is where all of our innovation exists. It's where our devs are. It's where our engineers are. Like these are the folks who are conceptualizing and building these tools in service of our clients. That's like the heartbeat of our innovation capability. But it's all driven by the ways that we're interacting with clients against these kind of two fundamental levers. And what I would say is the end of that story for us is we are committed to becoming an augmented agency. The idea that AI will be built into the fabric of the workflow, of the identity of who we are. And in that, it will superpower all of our people. It will allow our people to do what they are best at more often and to do less of the things that perhaps they don't like or that drive lower or limited value.
All right, so out of fear that we become like the panel we're trying not to be, what does that look like? Can you share it? Can you take it live?
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, I'll show you a couple tools. So I think there are probably a couple things that are really interesting. So let me set it up and then I'll pop them up. So the first is we Hotwire was one of the early entrants into the sort of answer engine optimization. We were, as I mentioned, part of what drew me to the agency was it was one of the few that was building tech, right? And so the first thing I'll show you is a tool that we built called Hotwire Spark. And Hotwire Spark is really let's see. All right, there we go. So Hotwire Spark is it's essentially our answer engine optimization proprietary technology, and it's built on a couple of ideas. The first is that we think of answer engines as a stakeholder group that ingests information in their own important and unique way, and that in some respects speaks a different language than other target audiences that we might be interacting with. And so Spark is really designed to help us answer the question of how do I optimize visibility for a brand across the different models that are driving awareness for like any company or product and within any kind of conversation type. I think there's something important that's sort of layered on top of Spark, which is that we then said, but that's only so useful if it's Gen Pop and the company's name, right? We have to be able to get to context. And so we engineered into Spark a context layer that says, what types of people do I care about? What is the context or the topics that matter to the company, meaning what's on my narrative roadmap? Where do I care about what's happening? What products specifically matter to me? Who are my competitors? And so on. And then from there, we can actually look across multiple topic areas and across multiple models and understand how each brand is being presented in these models. So what is their sort of competitively? How are they being mentioned against their competitors? And is that about general topics within the space or about specific products within the space? We can get very, very granular on the types of content that are actually driving citation and awareness. So these are the sorts of things you will want to talk about to improve not just your visibility, but your contextual visibility against the people you care about who care about the topics that matter to your business results. And so you can sort of imagine at this point now we know how you're showing up against your competitors and what you need to be talking about to show up better. So then the question becomes, well, where should you be talking about it? And so we can get very granular about which outlets, which channels, which platforms are driving citation authority within individual models. And we can do this in the macro across the models we're considering, or we can do it individually against each model. So from here, we're saying now we know broadly what we need to say. We know broadly where we need to say it. And the natural question, especially for an organization like this client, which is in the tech space, is they also care about sort of third-party endorsers that for this industry specifically come in the form of industry analysts. So we can also look at how industry analysts play into AI visibility. So specifically, which ones have higher influence or credibility within the models, and then how much are they talking about these individual clients. So now we sort of run through and we understand at a broad level what you need to be talking about to improve your visibility in specific answer engines about specific topics that you care about. Then Spark lets us actually take that a step further, and we can look specifically against specific target audiences. So not only do I know by topic area specifically the sorts of topics that will matter to the answer engines in question, but I can get down to a very granular level of saying, I want to speak to a CTO, or I want to speak to a chief AI officer. Those are the people that when they go to the answer engine, I really want to get my content. And we can target and customize content generation that actually is built to be delivered to these audiences and built to be seen as credible by the answer engine.
And
So,
it looks like, Grant, there was a question that come in about sort of different LLMs. It looks like you can select the LLM and you can, if you want to do a little bit more of a focus on ChatGPT versus Gemini versus
yep.
Claude, like there's the flexibility across models.
Exactly. And the intention there is not every model is as culturally sort of important in different parts of the world. And so for some organizations, they really care about all of them, or, I shouldn't say all, because obviously there are a lot of models and we don't do this for everyone. But we're adding new models all the time. And the idea is that in certain countries, certain cultures, one model really matters a lot more than others, right? I think this is changing, of course, but there was a period of time where I think ChatGPT was sort of the consumer model and Claude was sort of the commercial model. I think we're seeing a lot of things change every day. But yes, the idea is that we can look at it in the aggregate across multiple models, or we can look at it individually, model by model, and then we can further subset that by market or country, right? So we can get really, really specific and really granular based on what you're trying to say to whom and where.
And I didn't mean to interrupt you and kind of the
No,
walkthrough,
no,
Grant, but do you mind
no.
kind of for those that are participating, drop a question in the Q&A. We want to make sure this is relevant to what you guys are thinking about. And so, you're giving us kind of that walkthrough of like from
Yeah.
discovery to analysis.
So yeah, so if you think about it, right, we start by saying, where am I now? What's my visibility? And then we really begin to look at the health of that visibility. Is my visibility where I want it to be about the things that matter and to the people that matter? With that insight, we can get really, really granular with clients on here's what you should talk about. Here's how you should talk about it, right? And then what became very clear to us was but then we need to be able to optimize against what we're finding because this is changing all the time and we're rerunning these things kind of in a regular and consistent way. And so our AI Labs team spent about 18 months working on a second product, which we call Radiate. And Radiate is essentially at its core, almost think about it as a repeatable rubric against which to score and optimize a piece of content for each LLM. So essentially, we can say now, Spark tells us what you need to say to whom and where. And Radiate helps us figure out how you should say it to optimize for it. So essentially, at its very core, and I'll just sort of show it to you, is we take a piece of content, any piece of content, a blog post, a web page, whatever, and we can actually use the tech to help us rewrite and optimize the content. Essentially, think of it as almost like real-time message testing and iteration that's sort of happening using the underlying tech. And then from there, we can actually provide to you the underlying. So if you think of that as the front end, right? This is how we optimize the front end for AI visibility. Then we can actually give you your JSON schema to optimize the back end for AI visibility. So for folks who this may be kind of, what's that? Each of these answer engines is indexing lots of content and they're gathering it from lots of different places. And one of the things that we found is a lot of companies do not have their own owned assets set up, their web pages, their blogs, et cetera, set up to actually let the answer engines crawl them. And so they won't ever be indexed into the answer engines until they sort of optimize or update their backend. And we actually provide that information to our communications clients to give to their IT teams to update their backend. So essentially think about Spark tells us what to say, who to say it to. Radiate tells us how to say it and how to optimize where we say it to ensure that each of the answer engines is sort of gathering that information in a way that is useful. Oh, you're on mute.
So where does it go from here? So that's like the today present. Like where's this going?
I mean, I both love this question and I hate it because it's such a terrifying thing to
Sure.
get
And we'll
wrong.
say near future. So like this year, what's happening right now? We're talking a month from now, 60 days from now, 90 days from now. What are we talking about?
Yeah, I think so. So let me start with I think um, we're talking about maybe first and foremost a fundamental kind of transition that's been happening that I think will continue to happen for the next little bit, which is away from a let a thousand flowers bloom kind of model of innovation. You know, everybody building agents and everybody sort of off experimenting which has its value and its purpose on a change curve. But I think what we're beginning to get to is that sort of predictable performance, like the ability to actually use these tools to drive business results means they have to be integrated into the core of the business. And so that first thing means you can't just have everybody everywhere around the world building new things because you end up with a challenge, a problem, which is how do you how do you pick the ones that are best? You don't want 15 things doing the same thing, right? You're burning tokens, you're burning infrastructure, all that stuff is happening. So I think the first kind of fundamental shift is this almost like institutionalization of the imagining of it. And we can talk more about sort of the individual journey that I think happens next. But institutionally, what that means for us is we are really, really focused on building the orchestration layer into our workflows. So instead of thinking of like we're an agency that does a set of things and now we put AI on top of it and each person has some tools and they go off and they do that, we have sort of flipped that script completely. We are focused on building a fully integrated orchestration layer that takes all the things we care about and integrates them into an AI layer that then all of our people have the ability to interact with in a natural language sort of way. So we are in the process right now of bringing Claude Enterprise on board. This will be the underlying foundation for all of our kind of use of AI. And I think that's happening at a lot of organizations. I think we're seeing a lot of companies kind of realize that you can't have 1,000 people creating new things and ensure quality, security, consistency, performance, efficiency, et cetera. So I don't know, at a starting point, I think that's the first thing I would think about.
And maybe that's a jumping off point for so selfishly, how are we working with you?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, an incredibly exciting thing, right? So, you know, when I talked at the beginning about how we go from signal to insight to action, right, and compressing that. So, at its core, right, we can bring our own proprietary tech to bear, and we can do that in near real time, sort of for clients all the time. But there's this fundamental problem that exists in the data ecosystem, which is that, especially for communicators, the data that we're using is often borrowed or rented. It's not ours. It's not like, you know, the marketing team has sales data and the finance team has earnings results. And we don't own our own data usually. We're renting it from media providers or from, you know, intelligence providers like you guys. And so the challenge with that is the data always exists in a bunch of silos and makes it incredibly difficult to integrate it and make decisions sort of across the journey. So as if my motivation is to compress the time from signal to insight to action, then I need to make it such that those silos don't exist anymore. So that's really what brought us to partnering with you guys is that you have this unparalleled global brand and audience data set that is updated every day, all the time, all around the world, in every market, certainly that we care about, that our clients care about, across all these languages, B2B, B2C, right? Like there's this unbelievable data set that for most instances, for most clients, I think if they have access to that kind of sort of volume and valuable data, they're looking at it once a month or once a quarter, or maybe when they're doing planning. And so what we've been focused on, and what I think is so exciting about what we're doing together, is we're actually connecting your data set into that underlying infrastructure built on Claude that I just through an MCP, which I think means essentially that every one of our team members around the world, no matter what they're working on, will be able to engage with the Morning Consult data set even without their own sort of data and analytics capabilities. And so what you bring is the expertise of the client, the human judgment, the understanding of their business. And what the tech lets us do is democratize access to intelligence, essentially on demand in real time, all the time. And I think that is fundamentally distinctive, at least from the sorts of things that I've been seeing other
Yeah,
agencies
and that's
super
that's the
proud.
part of it for us. I mean, even since the start of the year, how much our business models continue to evolve is sort of recognizing we've done 100 million interviews in essentially the 50 largest economies, and we do it every day, to your point. But the reality is, like, we can build our own tech and the capabilities that you can go in there, but everyone has a different use case. And I think one of the really exciting things, and maybe just recognizing kind of the diversity of technical backgrounds on this call, MCP is a protocol that allows an AI platform like Claude. So I guess in the spirit of showing these things live, this is an example of my Claude Enterprise instance. This could be ChatGPT. MCP is a universal protocol, so this could interface into ChatGPT, into Copilot. But the idea is that like MCP in some ways, is how I kind of think about it, is like it's like giving the AI platform the instruction manual of how to go and get the data or to use one of our agents that's relevant to the task that's at hand. Now, this could be in a Claude environment, or it could be an MCP integration directly into the Hotwire products they were just showing. And it gives that sort of real-time integration in a way that doesn't require, I think, the same level of technology investment in the past with APIs. Now, we still have a number of APIs that are used by agency partners, and they're incredibly valuable at passing the actual data, and there's use cases for that. But MCP really kind of integrates the data really quickly. So this is just an example. At the start of this call, I was playing around and just asked, use Morning Console to create a dashboard that analyzes the favorability and reputation of OpenAI and ChatGPT over the past year. In this case, this is Claude and the most recent model here in terms of Opus 4.6, taking that and then going into our system and pulling back. Here's the Morning Consult data on brands across each metrics. It's analyzing it. It might ask me additional questions. It just built a dashboard pulling 52 weeks of Morning Consult data across four key brand health metrics. My favorite here is, it's going to build that dashboard real time, or it's going to allow me to open the JSON file directly. In this case, like to what you were showing before, like you could drop that code directly into your own environment, but you now have an interactive dashboard that it used to take us, hours to go and build with client partners, and it does it in minutes in the background. And I think a lot about like our world is changing so fast in those ways about how do we diffuse the data to agency partners like how ours did. It's on every single instance of Claude or ChatGPT that a employee is using, and then it's embedded in products. But I guess maybe as like a little bit more broader tee up, like where does this go from a like professional operating standpoint? If I'm on this call, and I think this is one of the questions that came in from the Q&A, was, I'm a head of communications, I'm a head of marketing, like how should I think about my role and in the future roles that I might play in an organization? Because there's all different flavors of CMOs and CCOs, but how are you seeing this evolve, and where do you think it goes from a professional leadership standpoint?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, right? I think it's probably nuanced in a lot of ways based on level and industry and how regulated you might be and so on. But I'm going to boil it down to what I think is the simplest articulation of kind of two paths. And I think lots of people can be both, but I think as we think about where this is all going, everybody probably needs to be one or the other. And so I would think of them as like Imagineers and builders. I think the one of the fundamental limitations of the use of AI for any profession is a person's capacity to imagine how they could do something fundamentally differently than the way they do it today by using AI. And that is a really challenging intellectual hurdle, right? Because as we talked about, humans are naturally resistant to something that feels threatening or different. This is a fight or flight response. It's chemical, it's completely normal, appropriate, expected. So those people who can sort of push over that hurdle, who can bring to bear deep, deep understanding of the craft, whatever that is, marketing, comms, any specific subspecialty, and then a technical kind of a level of technical understanding, kind of technical futurist, if you will, that allows them to push past the boundaries of what might not have been done before, what might feel scary or threatening, and imagine something. I think there will be a big future for those sorts of people. And built into that, I think, is the ability to then communicate what they have imagined to lay people who might not think of themselves as technologists or futurists and who might not want to be those people, right? So I think that's kind of bundle one. And I think that takes lots of flavors, but that's one piece. And I think interestingly, you and I have had this conversation a number of times. I think that's one of the things that you and Morning Consult have done really effectively for a long time is imagine a different way to do a thing and then build that new way, right? And so you see that in kind of the trajectory of your company, right? But so bundle one. I think bundle two, I'm going to call builders, and they are the people who can make it happen, who can run up against brick walls on dev or security or legal or IT or whatever, and continue to sort of navigate, negotiate, move through that process and get things built. These are probably the people who spend a lot of time talking about vibe coding. I think like that's the way you know who they are, right? And that is an incredibly important thing. If we don't have people who can navigate the complex infrastructure of an organization while building something, then it doesn't matter how many people you have imagining things, right? You can't make it. And if you can't make it, you can't deliver return on that investment. And so the investment will dry up. And so in my mind, every communicator or marketer kind of needs to be one of those two things. And all the better if you have the capacity to be both. And what I would say is I think both of those skill sets are absolutely learnable. I do not think they are like innately something you either have or you don't. I think it's completely something that can be learned, but I don't think there's one right way to learn it. I think this is very much a like go and do experiment. Those folks that we all know who bought a second computer to run OpenClaw to see what would that's the kind of people that we all need to spend more time with, talk to, ask questions of,
Well, and
learn.
I think that's like a great distinction too, is a couple of things that come up in the Q&A around like security and all the things that you would see as sort of those challenges for a builder of like you're gonna have to go out and educate legal, you're gonna have to go like kind of that role of the chief communications officer, the CMO of a cross-functional coordinator in the C-suite, like is ever more paramount here because I think there's also there's the capabilities overhang of how to use some of these things. There's also a knowledge overhang. I think a lot of people are sticking to like, oh, I heard 3 or 4 years ago that we shouldn't put any company information into like any environment because they're going to train our data. And the reality is that that's not how pre and post training works.
Yeah.
And that's not, for us, for instance, the reason why we have the retrieval augmented generation architecture and why we like MCP is like it addresses a lot of the underlying like concerns that people had about hallucinations. It can't like it's not going to hallucinate on our data because or at least our reg architecture won't because if we don't have data on it, it won't comment on it. It will actually tell you we don't have data. Now, I think the part that gets really exciting from our standpoint, to your point about condensing the speed, is okay, we've asked 100 million questions. I think we've asked a lot of good questions, generally about, I think we track 12,000 brands now across 50 countries. So we track a lot of brands, but there is always going to be something we don't ask a question about. And I think that's the other flip side of this is like, it also means that like you can go and ask a question, and that custom data is also now available through MCP. in that environment. So I think about a lot of like the hurdle for that builder is like, how do you stay open-minded about the fact that maybe you can't build it now, but who knows, like a Mythos type model all of a sudden might allow you to do things you just couldn't do before. The Imagineers got to figure it out. But we're not talking about a world where like we're not saying, hey, go set up OpenClaw on your company computer. It's, this recognition that there are certain things now, 3, 4 years into it, that like there are dogmas around security that are just wrong. And I think that's
Yeah.
like the biggest headache for us in procurement is like having to educate, like it's not 2002 anymore or
Well, and
2020.
I think that's spot on. And I mean, I'll add a couple of things. I think to your point, those OpenClaw users were doing it on their own computers outside the
Hopefully. Yeah.
infrastructure as they should. We're lucky. We have a really spectacular head of IT and who is quite learned, and we do a lot of work with cybersecurity companies. And so, our bar is actually extraordinarily high internally for what the security looks like, what the privacy standards look like, how we walled garden things between clients so client data never intermingles. Like all of that stuff is kind of,
Right.
I maybe shouldn't gloss over it, but it's built
Yeah, they're
into
clear
systems and it
important like
has
hurdles. You have to clear the hurdle.
yeah, and I think the answer, clearing the hurdle isn't do it and ask for forgiveness. Clearing the hurdle
Right.
is, to my point about we're past the thousand flowers bloom phase and we're into the institutionalization phase, is like there's a right way to do these things that appropriately protects an asset. Like data is an asset. The things that you own as an organization, these are important assets. You have a duty to protect them. But what I think is interesting about this, to your point, is it's not just different than it was in 2022, it's different than it was last week. Like
Yeah.
this is changing so fundamentally rapidly. And Mythos, I mean, who can even imagine how much that will change things? But like at the moment, even week over week over week, the things that these tools can do, the technology that's built into the back end from a security perspective, the ways that MCP thinks about data almost like a one-way valve, right? Data can move in one direction, but not in other. You can put in so many controls if you build these things right that I actually think increasingly we and there's a question about regulation and are we adequately regulating AI, and I think that's a different webinar for a different day. Happy to come back and have that
Sure.
conversation, but I think in the context of the regulatory and legal framework, the privacy framework, the sort of confidentiality framework that we exist, all the things that we're talking about are absolutely doable compliantly, legally, safely, sort of appropriately. And the challenge for those builders is navigating complexity that resists that change, not because the change is in and of itself bad or risky, but
Yeah.
because the change is change and change is resisted.
All right, so let's talk about this in the capacity from a client standpoint. So if you're leading a multinational communications function and you're not at like OpenAI or at Anthropic, like, are you still an AI organization? Should you be like, how should you be thinking about AI, like, and how you're framing out what AI means to your internal stakeholders, I guess, from an executive level, but also presumably, like, how do you start to think about positioning the function externally?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really important question. And I'm gonna boil it down in a minute, but I think let's start with we shouldn't pretend like technological innovation doesn't affect everything because it does, right? You could argue, and I think many have, that AI and sort of the evolution of AI is going to change society as much as the invention of electricity or the sort of harnessing of electricity, appreciating that nature
Use
invented
a
it,
lot
right?
of producers,
But
yeah.
but like the harnessing and use of electricity. So if we think about and even if you don't agree with that, certainly you could agree that it would be equal to the change or the transformation that, say, email drove, right? And both of those would be fundamentally disruptive changes. And I think that for an enterprise looks like a few things. It means what they sell, whatever business they are in, is going to be affected by AI. The products, how they manufacture them, how they make them, how they design them. It really, for a retail space, how you think about inventory control, like ordering, all of this stuff, I think will change using in some way, in one way, in shape or form. Then I think about how you interact with customers. Now, customers, in much the same way, sort of the advent of a smartphone changed what you expected with respect to access to information, right? There used to be, when I moved to California 25 years ago, somebody gave me a Thomas guide, which is like a big book of maps for the whole city of LA. And you had to like turn to page 215 to figure out, where the gas station was. And I think now you don't even think about you land in Berlin and pop open Google Maps and you just expect to have. So that fundamental transformation that's happened with consumers with AI is also going to affect how they look at companies, what they expect from companies, what they want from companies. So expectations of the consumer or the customer are going to change. And then the third piece is, I think, all of the potential value or benefit to a company is going to require significant change management. We are talking about moving a workforce. And for some organizations like ours, that's a few hundred people, and it's still a challenge. For organizations of large multinationals, operating in hundreds of countries, you could be talking about 100,000, 200,000. I mean, there are organizations with what, 1 million employees? So now you have to change that infrastructure. All those people need to change. And so in my mind, to sort of, my argument, and I've been saying this a lot, is essentially AI is making every company a technology company, whether they like it or not, whether they want to think about it that way or not. It is. Technology is becoming more important to their product development, to their R&D, to their sales, to their customer experience, to their employee experience. Like increasingly, this is going to matter more and more and more. And what that means is now every company is having to tell incredibly complex technological stories to multi-stakeholder audiences in an environment that is remarkably noisy, much noisier than it's ever been before, in part because now everyone's telling a technology story, and in part because generative AI has meant that there's just a lot more content. There's a lot, and a lot of it not great. Think of sort of AI slop in that regard. And so for us, as we think about who we're advising and how we're advising them, increasingly we're being brought on by non-technology companies, right? So historically, Hotwire has been a heritage technology brand. We serve technology companies. But increasingly, we're being brought on by retail companies and consumer packaged goods companies and all manufacturing organizations, all kinds of different types of companies who now have realized that they need to tell a really complex innovation technology story to these broad stakeholder groups in a way that's understandable, that's inspirational, and that activates a behavior change, actually gets people to do something different. And so I sort of flippantly say around the halls of Hotwire all the time, like AI is making every company a technology company, so every company needs a technology agency. We should be talking to everybody. And I think that is really like, that's my vision for where I think this whole thing is going, that increasingly everybody is going to have to behave like and compete with those technology companies who have had a long time learning how to do this, how to tell these stories, how to be compelling, how to motivate people.
And for
That's where the
those
name comes from.
who join the webinar, where should they go to learn more about Hotwire?
Right, absolutely. Well, you can visit our website, hotwireglobal.com. You can also visit our LinkedIn. We do an extraordinary amount of research. Most recently at Davos, I was in Davos for WEF, where we released a new piece of research with the House of Beautiful Business, which is a think tank over in Europe, which is really focused on the agentic organization. So, like, how do companies embrace the concept of agents? How do you do that thoughtfully, safely? How do you do that in a way that benefits your employee base, sort of ethically? Some really, really interesting research. If you've happened to find yourself in Athens in early May, I will be giving a brief keynote about this topic at the House of Beautiful Business's global annual meeting. But I think there are probably lots of resources. And of course, the stuff you probably can tell. I'm a bit of a nerd and I kind of love it.
No, and we're incredibly grateful, Grant, for your time here for the AI Spotlight, for the opportunity to partner with Hotwire. I think one of the things that I always love, and we were saying this in kind of the prep, was there's never a shortage of things for you and I to talk about. I think hopefully for those of you that joined us, the passion's real. I think the transformation that we're all about to go through is real, and I think having sort of those trusted partners and hopefully has been a helpful kind of two CEO perspective of how we're thinking about this in our organizations. But we really appreciate your time, Grant, and we're really excited to see where things go next. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. It's been
Thank you
great.
everyone for joining us.
Thanks,
Take care, y'all.
everybody.